Hi and welcome to Equestrian Life TV. I'm Brett Parbery and I'm fortunate enough to be sitting here with Kyra Kyrkland, who's a visitor to EQUITANA and our guest presenter for dressage. Welcome, Kyra.
Thank you.
Welcome to Australia, and I must say there's a lot of people here very happy to have you, and it's great to see you back. And just, we can never get too much Kyra in Australia, I can tell you that, so welcome. Kyra, what I'd like to do in this little section is to just get a little bit close and personal with you, find out a little bit what got you started in riding, who's been your major influences in your riding career, and then ask you what we'd like to do, what you'd like to present tomorrow in the masterclass. So just it's everyone's interest to find out, where did you start? Like, where does someone of your stature and what you've achieved, where did you start?
Well, I'm born in Helsinki, which is Finland's capital, and in a family without any sort of connections to horses, or we had a dog at home, but that was it. And then I had a godmother who had a farm, and we had a summer house quite nearby. So she had 4 boys and always wanted a girl, and me as the god kid, I was there a lot, and they had working like draft horses and cows, and so I think the first one I was sitting on was a cow, actually. And then after that I was sitting, you know, when they took home the hay, and with the draft horses I was sitting behind them, and yeah. I was maybe 8 years old, 9 years old at the time. Yeah. And when I wasn't there, then I was going with the local vet who would pick me up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I went with him all day. Yeah. Treating cows and, you know, holding bottles and things. So somewhere animals has always been part of my life. Yeah. Then I had a accident when I was 10 years old with one of the draft horses that got scared, and we were riding bareback and I fell off, and we had just long driving reins, and I got caught in the foot and got dragged behind that horse, and I was lucky that the stable manager was coming back from the pasture with another horse, so he could stop this one. Yeah. And then I had broken my arm, and it was put in caster, and you know, then they said, or I had just said that as soon as this is gone, then I want to ride again. And then my parents said, ooh, then it's better to put her in a riding school. And so I got like a 10 lesson beginner's course, and I think that they thought that that was it, but you know, I'm still learning.
Yeah. Still a student of the sport, aren't we? I mean, we're all students in this field, aren't we? It's the horses that teach us the most. So, I mean, that's really interesting to hear that you weren't from a horsey background. It was purely a genetic interest and you just found your way from there.
Yeah, and also then to be born in a country like Finland that wasn't really a big riding country anyway. Yeah. So I don't know. I was lucky because at the riding school I started, it was a very good riding school with. Yeah. And we got to like compete in jumping and dressage on the school horses, so they could even do flying changes, and they were really well schooled. Yeah. So I think lucky to start in a good way, and then when I was finished with school, I went to Sweden and made my riding teacher education, and then it went on from there. And
that's when you went to Flyinge? Is that,
no, that's when I went, like 72, 74, I was at Strömsholm, which is the Swedish equestrian school. They have 2 schools there. Yeah. And then I was back in Finland. At that time I was still doing both jumping and dressage. Right. So I worked at a farm with jumping horses for a year in Finland, but at the same time I had my second own horse that was I bought it as a 4-year-old, and I thought, well, you know, if it jumps then I'm more jumping, and if it goes dressage then I do more dressage, and it could absolutely not jump. Yeah. So then it became dressage, and from then on I swapped totally to dressage.
To dressage, yeah. And from then you were you finished your riding education, you were then into Flyinge? You went then down to...
I have been many decades here already, so there was like a few decades in between, because then I went to Germany to Walter Christensen first, who was a very good trainer, and he was educated by Deal, who also was Herbert Rebein's teacher, my second teacher in Germany. Yeah. And so I was going back and forth between Finland and Germany, staying in Germany for some months at a time with the horses, and then I went back to Finland and started my own training facility there at the same place where this riding school was, where I started. So that was my base. And then 1990 I met Richard at Herbert Reva's place, and then he moved to Finland, and I mean, I was happy in Finland, but it was quite small there, and I felt that if I still had time to get better and maybe do other things, and then we got the or they wanted us as head trainers at Flyinge which was also in Sweden. So then we moved down there and stayed 8 years there, and then we moved to England.
To England, okay. So you mentioned Herbert Rabine. I mean, would he be the single most influential person in your career so far?
Well, I think I still, when I have a problem, and then I can still see him ride, and then I in my own body I try to copy and think how would he have done it. The other big influence is of course Richard, my husband, who has been helping me and from the ground like the last 20 years. And he has a fantastic eye, and he really it always matches with my feeling. So that's fantastic.
And I mean, I guess we get into now the philosophy. I mean, I've always said that people have to have a philosophy to form a style and a system and a way they want to ride. They must have an underlying philosophy of what they think dressage is. What would be your philosophy?
Well, I think it has evolved from first going to Sweden, where they were very good at explaining, and we always said what, how and why. And those are the three questions I still always ask myself if I get a problem. What is the problem, and how can I solve it, and why should I solve it in a certain way? And that's also what I try to get to the students. Then they maybe were not so good at teaching the horses all the movements, but that they were very good in Germany. So somewhere I think I did then a mix of both of those. So I want the riders to understand what they are doing, and horses are no machines. Every horse is different, and you have to find the key to that horse. And if it doesn't go one way, then you have to find another way. It doesn't help that you do the same thing just stronger, or it's like, if I speak Finnish to you and you don't understand mitä mä sanon sulle, niin se ei auta. It doesn't help that I start to scream. I have to find English or some other language
way of explaining it.
Yeah,
it's true. So that's really interesting. So I suppose when we think of Kyra Kyrkland, the rider, we think of a horsewoman who, if someone in the world is going to produce a horse to Grand Prix, it is you. Through your horse, for lack of a better word, horsemanship, your understanding, your desire to want to work out the problem. Is that marrying up with the sciences that come on with Andrew McLean and the way that he's bringing the animal science through? I know you do a bit of work together. You find a common bond there?
Absolutely, and I was already in school I was interested in psychology anyway. So I think it's a lot like what goes on in your own head when you are riding. And then I started to think that, hang on, maybe the horses they learn in a specific way too. So I think I was much earlier, actually, before I even had talked to Andrew or other horse behaviorists. I had started to think in those ways, and it feels really good to see that so many other people have locked on that and started to explain to people. Maybe it's also because you always, before you said that you have to be third generation horse person to understand, and that's probably that you learn from your parents, who learn from, there is so much to learn from horses. So like me, born in a town, I was lucky to have teachers I copied them, and they did the right thing. But I think today, with so many people born in towns, and you are used to computers and cars and things like that, and then you expect the horse to react in the same way. So they don't see that part of it anymore, and that's why all those who can explain how a horse is learning actually are very, very important. And it's also part of, you know, I'm a professor in equitation in Sweden at the University of Uppsala, and that is part of the professorship to work together with the science there, and that I'm very excited about.
Yeah. So you are, I think, the world's first professor. Are you a professor in equestrian or dressage or
well, riding, like
riding?
So teaching and riding and.
Yeah. Well, I think you're a very worthy recipient of that, and I think the whole world would agree. Next question I'd like to ask is, how does someone of your riding ability, and we know your ability, then step over into a coach's shoes and then transfer that sometimes natural feel and natural reaction and natural horsemanship? How do you find then stepping over to a coach? Because you're a very successful coach and you coach many of the world's top riders. How do you find that?
Well, I think, like, you know, in dressage you can't really be earning your living only on riding and winning all the trophies. It's not that much money in this. So every rider almost have to start teaching too. And then, you know, when I started to teach, I was also shouting and screaming until I understood that it was actually my frustration when I was screaming to the students. They want to learn. And in the same way, I learned that if they don't get it in one way, then I have to be able to explain it in another way. And I think that riding is so much, it's an experience of feeling. And
personal.
And the rider has to feel what the horse is doing, and feeling is a sense, so you have to experience it to recognize it. And so partly, like with my students, sometimes I sit on their horses just to get them to react as I want them, and then the student can go on, and then they say, okay, it's this what you are looking for. And I remember so well, like with Herbert Rehbeins getting on my horses, and then you got on and it was like a different horse. And you said, I want to learn to ride as well, that I could maintain this feeling more than 10 minutes after he had got off. And that's like still my feeling. So, and it's maybe also with the students, it's not really only how, because I have worked a lot with young people, like juniors and young riders, and I wanted them to understand what they were doing and become good people, not only like competitors winning everything, but be successful in life. And I think somewhere in riding, if your personal life is not well organized and you are happy with yourself, then you are never going to be successful in riding either.
So you feel a correlation between, let's say, a humble, honest, with themselves, grounded person, and that flows through into the riding.
Of course, then when you are inside the arena, you have to want to win. But you have to also be like realistic and just like riding is so much here and now. It doesn't really matter if the horse went well yesterday or if today is the Olympics. The horse doesn't know it. He is what he is that day, and you have to accept that and do the best what you can do with the horse that day.
And Kyra, I mean, your one combination that really formed my philosophy in the years was you with Matador. I mean, I can remember watching the DVDs of you riding, and that's what inspired me to be a dressage rider. And you produced Matador, you had him as a 2-year-old, so you produced him right the way through. Do you feel that that's a very special part of forming a combination, is that bond right through the levels?
And I mean, I got him when he was 2.5 years old, just backed, and he was very, very sensitive, but like a very nice person. But from the beginning, he didn't have that like big gaits, or you wouldn't really have, or when you were riding him, you had a fantastic feeling and you thought this is fantastic. And then you took a video and looked at it and said, what, that trot is nothing. I mean, he he felt like driving the biggest Mercedes with everything you can buy for a big car. And then when you looked at it, it was like a old little Skoda going. But the feeling was right there all the time. So I just believed in it all the time. And then of course when you have the horse from the beginning and you know what has happened to him, then you understand later on. I mean, I went to him to Denmark once to a stallion show and was about to do a extended trot and started it, and people started to clap, and he got scared and like cantered off, and I was stupid enough to try it a couple of more times, and they clapped again. So he would, like 3 years later still, every time I went on a diagonal, I had this little and then it was fine. And I think if I would have got him later, I would have got annoyed. Why do you always have to like run away? But every time he did it, I knew it was really, I had put him in that situation. So that thought,
so you had all the ground work behind you to know, so yeah, I mean that's interesting. That could be sometimes an explanation why some of these really top class horses and expensive horses maybe aren't working with the combinations, certainly in the early stages, is because of that whole depth. And that's what makes dressage so special, isn't it? It's really, we look to Charlotte, who just won a gold medal after 5 years, but with the same horse the whole time, under a watchful eye. It is the relationship between horse and rider, the combination, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is a bit like a marriage. There can be two very good persons, but they just don't match. And then when you find the right match, it can look, or it can be unexpected, but it just works. And I mean, I definitely, I had a special bond with him. But you also, I have had the same bond with every horse, or not quite the same, but in your mind you have to think that the horse that you are competing, or your number one horse, is the best that you have ever had. Because somewhere you have to put all that work and all that believe in what you are doing. So,
Kyra, just a quick question. We have 2 questions we'd like to ask. They've asked everybody. First of all, if a thing called the bucket list, okay? If you had a bucket list, what is the one thing you'd like to do regarding your dressage career that you'd like to do in the next, before you finish?
Well, I'm still working on it, because I still would like to come out with one nice Grand Prix horse.
Yeah, really? Okay.
Yeah, and because I...
Oh no, I thought we're going to compete against you for longer. My God.
Well, as long as I physically feel that I can do it, I still ride 6 horses a day, and I like the education, but I also need a goal with the horses. So that I would like still to do. And
well, that's really interesting, because as a fellow competitor, you're very hard to beat. And but no, really, and as a fellow competitor, we'd love nothing more than to see you in the arena, because we know when you're in the arena, we have to ride. And this next question I'd like to ask is what would be the single most valuable piece of information that you've been given, and who was it from?
I think it was, I read it somewhere, and it said, normally people say that training makes perfect, but I think it's perfect training makes perfect.
Yeah, that's a good one. That is a good one. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kyra, thank you. We loved having you. We cannot get too much Kyra in this country.